My name is Leah, and at 27 years old, I lived a life that appeared calm and straightforward. I worked as a school teacher, and on the surface, everything about my life seemed peaceful. But behind the scenes, I carried a complicated past, one that few people knew about. I had hidden it well, and only a handful of people knew the real story. Before we dive in, we'd love to hear from you. Drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. We're excited to connect with all of you, so don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more amazing content. Now back to the story. It all started the day I met Gabriel. He wasn't like anyone I had ever met. Gabriel was kind-hearted, genuine, and had a smile that could light up any room. From the moment our eyes met, there was an immediate connection between us. It was undeniable. But what I didn't know at the time was that Gabriel was hiding something huge. He was the heir to one of the wealthiest and most influential families in the country, the Westfields. As our relationship grew stronger, so did our bond. It felt natural, as if we had known each other for a lifetime. But there was something that made Gabriel even more extraordinary. Despite being part of such an elite family, he never once mentioned his wealth. It was as if he didn't care about it, and instead, he focused on our connection. I, too, kept a lot from him. I was Leah, the modest, down-to-earth teacher living in a small apartment and simply enjoying life. After 6 months of being together, my school organized a trip to the city zoo. Gabriel, ever thoughtful and attentive, volunteered to join us and help keep an eye on the children. It was a beautiful spring day, and everyone was buzzing with excitement as we walked through the exhibits, guiding the kids along. We stopped by the penguin enclosure, and I couldn't help but laugh at how they waddled in a perfect little line. It was such a charming sight. That's when Gabriel turned to one of the kids and whispered something in their ear. Then he stood up straight and turned to me, a playful glint in his eyes. "I've done my research," he said with a grin. "Did you know penguins mate for life? They stay together forever. I want to do the same with you, Leah. I love you." Before I could process what he said, Gabriel dropped to one knee in front of the penguin exhibit, with the children's laughter and giggles filling the air. He opened a small velvet box, revealing a stunning engagement ring. "Leah, will you marry me?" he asked, his voice trembling with emotion. I stood frozen for a moment, caught completely off guard by the suddenness of it all. But as I looked over to the children, I saw that they had made homemade signs, reading, "Say yes, Miss Leah. Marry Gabriel." The sight of it made me laugh through my tears, and without a second thought, I said yes. "Yes, Gabriel, I'll marry you," I responded, my heart swelling with joy. The children cheered, their voices echoing around us, and it was a moment I would always remember. However, with every great happiness, there are often complications waiting to arise. Not long after our engagement, Gabriel informed me that his father wanted to meet me. His voice was calm, but I could sense the tension in it. "My father wants to meet you," he said one evening, and I had a feeling that something significant was about to unfold. Meeting Henry Westfield, Gabriel's father, felt like walking straight into a lion's den. His office was perched on the top floor of a glass skyscraper, offering a breathtaking view of the city below. But the view wasn't what unsettled me. It was the way Henry looked at me. His eyes pierced through me as if assessing my very soul. I could feel him judging me even before he spoke. "So you're a teacher?" he asked, his voice dripping with condescension. I hesitated for a moment, unsure of what to say, but I managed to steady myself. "Yes, sir," I replied, trying to keep my composure. He raised an eyebrow as though impressed by my calmness. "Do you have any idea how much Westfield Enterprises is worth?" he continued, his tone dismissive. "No, sir. I'm not really interested in that kind of thing," I responded honestly, trying to remain unfazed. To me, his wealth meant nothing. Henry chuckled, a dry, humorless laugh. "Everyone says that at first. Then when the divorce happens, they want half of everything," he added bitterly. He launched into a long speech about protecting family wealth and ensuring that no one could ever take it from them. Then, without warning, he pulled a document out of his desk drawer and slid it toward me. "It's simple, Leah," he said coldly. "If you want to marry my son, you'll sign this prenuptial agreement. It waives any claim to the Westfield fortune. No money, no property, nothing." Gabriel, who had been silent until this moment, finally spoke up, his frustration evident. "Dad, this is ridiculous," he snapped. "Leah's not like that." But Henry didn't listen. "They're all the same, Gabriel, until they prove otherwise," he retorted, his voice icy. "Enough, Dad," Gabriel shouted, his patience clearly wearing thin. "Don't talk about my future wife like that ever again. Leah doesn't have to sign it." I sat there, the weight of the moment thick in the air. Henry's cold, unyielding gaze was fixed on me. Despite the tension, I took the pen in my hand without hesitation and signed the agreement. My quick decision seemed to catch Henry off guard. "Aren't you even going to read it?" he asked, his disbelief evident. "No, Mr. Westfield," I replied calmly, meeting his eyes. "I don't need to. I'm not interested in your money. I love Gabriel." The following months passed in a blur of wedding preparations. Gabriel's family insisted on a grand wedding, one that seemed more about flaunting their wealth than celebrating love. My mother, Annabelle, observed the entire process with a mix of amusement and concern. She was the only one who truly knew my past, the only one who understood why I signed the agreement without a second thought. The night before the wedding, my mother called me into her room. She looked serious, almost secretive, and handed me a sealed envelope, her hands trembling slightly. "Your biological father left this for you," she said softly. "He wanted you to open it on your wedding day." My heart skipped a beat. "My biological father?" I asked, my voice faltering. I had never known my real father. My mother had always told me she raised me on her own. At least that's what I thought all these years. "There's so much you don't know, Leah," she said, her voice filled with emotion. "So much I've kept hidden to protect you. Tomorrow, when you open this, you'll understand everything." Little did I know, this letter would change my life forever. The morning of the wedding arrived, and I found myself in the grand cathedral, surrounded by the country's wealthiest business people and the Westfield family's powerful associates. My mother sat in the front row, holding the mysterious envelope. Her face was unreadable, but her eyes spoke volumes. There was something deeply important about the letter I was about to open. As the ceremony began, I noticed a sharp chill in the air. Richard Westfield, Gabriel's father, walked over to me with a smug grin. He leaned in and said in a sweet voice, "I hope you don't regret signing that contract, dear daughter-in-law," though the words were laced with an undercurrent of malice. It was then that my mother, who had been quietly sitting at the back of the church, stood up, her movements deliberate and calm. There was no hesitation in her steps. She walked toward me, her voice clear and filled with purpose. "It's time, darling," she said, holding the envelope. Everyone's eyes were on us as I took the envelope from her. My hands trembled as I tore it open. The contents were simple, a letter and a stack of legal documents. As I began to read the letter aloud, the room seemed to shift. The tension in the air was palpable. Richard's face, which had been full of arrogance just moments before, drained of color as shock and disbelief spread across it. The letter began, "Dear Leah, if you're reading this, it means your wedding day has come, and I am not there to walk you down the aisle. My name is Albert Vaugh, and I am your father." The words seemed to echo in the cathedral as I tried to absorb their meaning. I was stunned. My biological father, the man I never knew existed, was reaching out to me on the most important day of my life. But the letter wasn't finished, and I had to continue reading to understand the full extent of the surprise that awaited me. "Before you continue reading, please review the attached documents," the letter instructed. I pulled out the papers that came with the letter, my hands shaking. The first documents I unfolded were property deeds. Then came stock certificates and detailed financial records. As I flipped through each page, I noticed Richard Westfield's face growing even paler. His lips moved, but he barely made a sound, mumbling under his breath, "Impossible." "Vaugh Industries?" I read aloud, my voice steady despite the growing confusion and emotion inside me. The name Vaugh was not familiar to me at all, and yet, the more I read, the clearer it became. "You may be wondering why you never knew me. The answer is long and painful. Your mother and I were deeply in love, but our business enemies were relentless. After several attempts on my life, I made the hardest decision, to disappear in order to protect both you and your mother. Your mother agreed to keep everything a secret and create a new life for you. far away from the corporate world that caused us so much pain. But I never stopped watching over you from the shadows. At this point, the weight of the situation was sinking in. My entire life had been a lie. The father I thought had abandoned me was actually alive and had been secretly watching over me. As I read on, I learned even more. VA Industries didn't disappear as everyone believed. It simply transformed, operating under different names and across various countries. All these years I've been building an empire for you, my only heir. I looked up at Richard, whose face was now an ashen gray, his eyes darting nervously between the documents and me. The room seemed to hold its breath. The documents you hold give you full control of VA Holdings, a conglomerate that includes 40% of global tech industries, the Blue Moon hotel chain, VA Pharmaceuticals, and a majority stake in Westfield Enterprises. Richard's face was completely drained of color as he took a step back, his expression one of pure disbelief. A majority stake? That's impossible, he muttered, trying to regain his composure. His voice was shaky, and the room's attention was fixed on him. This was his worst nightmare coming true. I didn't waver. Yes, my daughter. For years I've secretly acquired shares in Westfield Enterprises through various shell companies. As of today, you control 51% of the Westfield business empire. Richard was no longer the man who had walked in arrogantly just hours before. His entire demeanor had shifted. Why reveal this now? I continued reading. Because my sources have informed me of the unjust prenuptial contract you were forced to sign. Richard Westfield, known for his ruthless business tactics, now finds himself on the defensive. I could feel Richard's discomfort growing. The truth was unraveling, and he was powerless to stop it. My mother, the letter continued, has secretly managed this entire empire under different identities, preparing for this moment. She will teach you everything you need to know. I love you, my daughter. I hope you can forgive my absence and understand that every decision I made was to protect you. Albert Vaugh. The father I never knew existed. As I finished reading, the room was silent. Everyone, including Gabriel, who was standing beside me, was staring at me in astonishment. I could see his mixture of admiration and disbelief in his eyes. Richard stood frozen, as if he had seen a ghost. His arrogance was gone, replaced by fear and confusion. He didn't know how to react to the revelation of my hidden heritage. My mother, now standing tall and confident, looked every bit the powerful businesswoman she truly was. Gone was the quiet, unassuming accountant I had always known. The strategist, who had orchestrated this entire plan for years, was standing before me. With a calm but authoritative voice, my mother spoke, addressing Richard directly. "Mr. Westfield," she said, her voice thick with authority, "I think it's time we renegotiate that prenuptial agreement, don't you think?" Richard's face flushed with panic. "This is a trick. Vaugh is dead. His company was dissolved years ago," he shouted, trying to regain control of the situation. But my mother was unshaken. She reached into her handbag and pulled out a thick stack of documents. "Are you sure?" she replied smoothly, her voice unwavering. "I have here the records of every stock transaction involving Westfield Enterprises for the past 20 years. Would you like to review them?" Gabriel stepped forward, squeezing my hand reassuringly. He looked at me with love and compassion, and his words were filled with sincerity. "I don't care if you're richer than my entire family, Leah. I love you for who you are," he said, his voice steady and calm. Tears welled up in my eyes as I whispered back, "And I love you, Gabriel. I never cared about money, yours or mine." At that moment, everything changed. Richard had lost all control, his mask of arrogance falling away. His outburst was cut short as an unexpected voice came from the back of the church. An older man, leaning heavily on a cane, began walking toward us. Whispers rippled through the room as everyone recognized him immediately. "It's poetic justice," the man said, his voice carrying an unmistakable authority. "Albert Vaugh." Several people murmured in awe. Richard's face went completely white. His terror was clear. I looked at the man now standing before me, my biological father, the man I never knew, the man who had stayed hidden all these years. "I'm sorry I missed so many years of your life, my daughter," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But now I can finally be here for you on the most important day of your life." And in that moment, I realized that this day, this wedding, was going to change everything. Overcome with emotion, I rushed into my father's arms, sobbing uncontrollably. For 27 years, I had lived with unanswered questions, the emptiness of not knowing my true father. Now, as I felt his strong embrace, all those years of confusion and loneliness seemed to melt away. Finally, everything I had wondered about my past, all the pieces of my life that had never made sense, had come together. Richard, who had been trying to slip away unnoticed, froze as my father's voice cut through the tension. "Leaving so soon, Richard?" my father called out. "Don't you want to discuss how you tried to destroy my company 20 years ago? Or how you sent assassins to my home?" With a groan, Richard crumpled onto a nearby bench, as if the weight of his guilt had finally caught up with him. "It was business. Just business," he mumbled weakly, clearly trying to justify his actions, but his words were hollow. "No, Richard," my father interrupted, his voice firm and resolute. "It was cruelty. The same cruelty you showed when you forced a young teacher to sign a contract that stripped her of everything." The silence that followed was deafening. I could feel the weight of my father's words hanging in the air, and a sense of relief washed over me. It was as if a cloud had been lifted from my life, and the truth had finally been spoken. As I stood there, my mother, who had been quietly watching this all unfold, stepped forward. Her posture was strong, her expression one of quiet authority. She took my father's hand, and in that moment, I could see how the years of separation had dissolved between them. Their eyes met, and though they had been apart for 2 decades, the love between them had never truly faded. It was still there, in the way they looked at each other. "The wedding will continue," I said, glancing at Gabriel, who was standing beside me, his face filled with an expression of warmth and sincerity. "If you still want to marry the heir to VAL Industries, of course." Gabriel's face lit up with a smile, and he squeezed my hand gently. "I would marry you even if you had no money," he said, his voice steady and filled with love. I could feel my heart's words at his words, and with that, the ceremony resumed. But there was one significant change. Instead of Richard Westfield walking me down the aisle, it was my father who took on that honor. As we made our way down the aisle, I could feel Richard's gaze burning into the back of my head, but it was clear now that he was no longer in control. His world had crumbled in front of him, and he could only watch as everything he had worked for began to unravel. He sat quietly in his seat, defeated and exposed for all to see. At the reception, surrounded by close family and friends, my father told the full story of how Richard had tried to destroy VAL Industries using illegal and violent tactics. He revealed how, years ago, Richard had orchestrated several attempts on my father's life in order to gain control of the company. My father also explained how, in an effort to protect us, he had faked his own death and had been living in secret ever since, rebuilding his empire piece by piece. It was my mother, though, who had been the true mastermind behind everything. While appearing to be a simple accountant, she had managed my father's entire empire under different identities, carefully preparing for the moment when all of this would come to light. Without her quiet strength and intelligence, none of this would have been possible. The months that followed brought sweeping changes. Richard Westfield was forced to step down as CEO of Westfield Enterprises after his crimes were exposed. His ruthless tactics and the lengths he had gone to protect his empire were revealed for the world to see. Gabriel, who had always been more ethical and compassionate than his father, took over the company. He steered the business in a new direction, focusing on more ethical practices and the betterment of society. As for my parents, after 20 years of separation, they finally remarried. Their wedding was a quiet, intimate affair, the complete opposite of mine. But it was perfect in its simplicity. Their love story had always been one about quality, not quantity, and that small private wedding reflected that. In a groundbreaking move, VAL Industries and Westfield Enterprises merged under a new name, VAL Westfield Global. Gabriel and I worked side by side to transform the companies, focusing on social responsibility and ethical business practices. We weren't just building a legacy for ourselves, we were also laying the groundwork for future generations to follow in our footsteps. Years passed, and as our businesses grew, so did our family. The empire that had once seemed so important took a back seat to the love and connection we shared. We still thrived professionally, But the most important thing in our lives was the bond between us, our family. Richard Westfield, once the symbol of corporate greed and ruthless ambition, came to us one evening, a changed man. He confessed his wrongdoings at a family dinner, his voice filled with regret. "Money and power consumed me," he said quietly, looking around the table at us. "They turned me into a monster who almost destroyed my own son's life." It was a raw moment of honesty from the man who had once seemed untouchable. But in the end, it was a reminder that even the most lost souls can find their way back to the light, if they're willing to face their past and seek redemption. In the years that followed, we established the Leah Vaugh Foundation to support teachers and schools in underserved areas. We named it after my mother, who had shown us all that true strength doesn't come from wealth or power, but from love and perseverance. My father, too, had made up for lost time. He became the most devoted grandfather to our children, teaching them about business, but more importantly, about integrity and compassion. 5 years after that life-changing wedding, our family was whole again. We had healed, both personally and professionally. The business empire that once seemed so vital now took a back seat to the love that bound us together. Every time I looked at the framed prenuptial contract hanging in my office, I couldn't help but smile. It was a reminder of how life sometimes has a way of delivering justice, and that when people like Richard Westfield came to our Sunday dinners, seeking advice and carrying gifts for their grandchildren, it showed that forgiveness and redemption were possible, even for those who once seemed beyond hope. My mother often said, "Money can buy many things, but love, integrity, and family are priceless." And she was absolutely right. Our story wasn't just about poetic justice or satisfying revenge. It was about the triumph of love over greed, integrity over manipulation, and family over fortune. Though I now run one of the largest business conglomerates in the country, I've never stopped teaching. Once a week, I return to the same elementary school where I began, running a project that introduces children to the basics of teamwork and entrepreneurship. They learn to work together, come up with creative ideas, and understand simple concepts like saving money or running a small business. Some things, like the love of teaching, are part of who you are, no matter how much your life changes. This project has become my way of staying grounded, reminding myself that no matter how high you climb in life, the most important lessons are often the simplest ones. It's not just about business, it's about shaping the future, one lesson at a time. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed the story, be sure to like the video and subscribe to our channel. This is Family Secret Files, where justice always finds its way. See you next time.